Have you ever noticed how quickly a disagreement becomes a competition? Whether it's politics, religion, social media, or even the dinner table, we're often more interested in proving we're right than understanding why someone else sees the world differently than we do. But what if fairness isn't about winning arguments at all? What if it begins with the humility to listen before we judge? I'm Brandon Jubar, and this is Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the 17th Sunday in Ordinary Time, we'll explore how wisdom, human dignity, and ethical discernment work together to create something far more demanding than simple neutrality. They create the lifelong practice of even-handedness. In this episode, we're asking an important question. Have we become so committed to being right that we've forgotten how to be fair? Along the way, we'll discover why true justice begins with understanding, why every person deserves equal dignity, and why building a better world requires us to judge our own ideas with the same honesty we expect from everyone else. And before we're finished, I'll leave you with a simple question that might just change the way you approach your next difficult conversation. So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings for the 17th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle A of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. So our first reading is from 1 Kings. It's chapter 3, verses 5 and 7 through 12. Our second reading is from Paul's letter to the Romans. It's chapter 8, verses 28 through 30. And our gospel reading is from Matthew. It's chapter 13, verses 45 through 52. Now we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, then we'll look for the messages and the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. And with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from 1 Kings. The Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart, to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, "Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be." Our second reading is from Paul's letter to the Romans. Brothers and sisters, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those he predestined, he also called. Those he called, he also justified. Those he justified, he also glorified. And our gospel reading is from Matthew. Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. Once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. This is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all these things? Jesus asked. Yes, they replied. He said to them, Therefore every teacher of the law who has become a disciple in the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a house, who brings out of his storeroom new treasures as well as old. All right, so let's go back and take a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from 1 Kings, and the story of Solomon is one of the Bible's most famous wisdom narratives. Now, what I find sort of interesting is that if you look historically, the time that Solomon was supposed to have lived, the Hebrew people were just a tribe of hill people. There was no big kingdom. There weren't countless numbers of them. It's likely that if Solomon was a real person, he was probably a tribal chieftain of sorts. So whether this story records an actual event or uses a legendary version of a king to teach an ideal of leadership, that isn't really the point. The story asks a more timeless question. If you could ask for anything, what would make you a truly good leader? Would it be wealth, power, long life, victory over your enemies? Well, Solomon surprises us by asking for something far more valuable, a discerning heart. That choice gets at the very foundation of a core value that I call even-handedness. We like to think fairness comes naturally, but it doesn't. Our minds, your mind, my mind, everyone's minds, our minds are all full of shortcuts, loyalties, assumptions, personal experiences, right, which we often weigh much heavier in our decision-making than any sort of data. And all these things that quietly, or loudly in some cases, influence our judgments. If we only listen to the people we already agree with, or only seek evidence that confirms what we already believe, we're not going to be fair. We're simply protecting our own perspective. Fairness requires the discipline to slow down, listen carefully, and then ask, what might I be missing? Notice, too, that Solomon doesn't ask for certainty. He asks for discernment. That's an important distinction. Discernment accepts that life is frickin' complicated and that understanding takes work. Discernment values curiosity over our own ego. It values evidence over our assumptions. It values thoughtful reflection over the snap judgments that many of us tend to make. Whether we're resolving a family disagreement, evaluating a public policy, or just trying to understand someone who sees the world differently, fairness starts long before we reach a conclusion. It begins with us having the willingness to understand. Even-handedness begins with the humility to understand before we judge. So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that fairness begins with understanding. A just society isn't built by people who are always certain that they're right. A just society is built by people who have the humility to seek understanding before passing judgment. That's where even-handedness takes root, because fairness begins with understanding. Our second reading was from Paul's letter to the Romans, and this passage from Romans has sparked centuries of theological debate, especially over ideas like predestination and divine calling. Those discussions, they are very important within Christianity, but they aren't the only way to read this text. If we step back from the doctrine for a moment, we can see something broader. Paul is describing humanity in very collective terms. He's not dividing people by wealth or power, or status or influence. His emphasis is on shared purpose, not social hierarchy. That idea resonates far beyond religion. Healthy societies flourish when they begin with the assumption that every person possesses inherent dignity and the capacity to contribute. We don't all have the same talents. We don't all get the same opportunities. We don't all live the same life experiences, but we all deserve to be treated with equal respect and then given a fair chance to develop our potential. Even-handedness doesn't erase our differences. What it does is it refuses to rank our worth because of those differences. This is where fairness moves beyond personal wisdom and becomes more of a social commitment. It's one thing to approach an individual with an open mind. It's another thing completely to build schools, workplaces, courts, and communities that reflect the belief that everyone deserves equal consideration. When we recognize the humanity that we share, we're less likely to create systems that favor one group while quietly excluding another. Fairness becomes more than a personal virtue. It becomes the foundation of a just society. Even-handedness recognizes the inherent worth and potential of every single person. So the main lesson I got from our second reading is that fairness honors every person. Understanding helps us judge wisely, but equal dignity reminds us who deserves that wisdom. Every person should be approached with the same respect, the same opportunity, and the same inherent value, because fairness honors every person. Okay, our final reading was from the Gospel of Matthew. And this reading weaves together three short parables. Each one reveals a different aspect of what truly deserves our commitment. The hidden treasure and the pearl of great price. Well, they both describe something so valuable that it's worth giving up everything else to obtain. Read through a humanistic lens, they invite us to ask a simple question, but not an easy one. What is valuable enough to shape the way we live? Now, if we answer a fair and just society is valuable enough, and I really hope we can agree that it is, then pursuing a fair and just society can't be an occasional hobby. It has to become a guiding principle. Now, the final image, however, it's the most challenging. A fishing net gathers everything in its path before the catch is sorted. Like many of Jesus' parable, it ends with dramatic language about separating the good from the bad, and that imagery reflects the worldview of its time, but beneath it lies a much more timeless insight. Discernment isn't about condemning people. It's about evaluating ideas, evaluating actions and behaviors, and doing so in accordance with a consistent set of ethical standards. Fairness doesn't ask us to approve of everything equally. It asks us to judge without prejudice or without favoritism. Now, that's an important distinction in today's world. Even-handedness is not moral relativism, where every opinion is treated as equally beneficial. It's also not ideological tribalism, where we excuse harmful behavior simply because it comes from our side. A fair society depends upon people who are willing to ask difficult questions of everything, including themselves. The net catches everything. The work of discernment doesn't happen in the water. It's not done by the net. The work of discernment is done by the people on the shore. The goal isn't to defend our team. The goal is to strengthen the common good by getting rid of the bad and keeping what is good for everyone. Even-handedness requires the courage to pursue the common good with consistent, principled judgment. So the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that fairness chooses the common good. A commitment to fairness means more than treating people with equal dignity. It also means evaluating our actions by whether they help or harm the communities we share. When we pursue justice with consistency instead of favoritism, fairness chooses the common good. All right, so let's review the lessons we've talked about so far. In our first reading from 1 Kings, the main lesson I came away with was fairness begins with understanding. In our second reading from Romans, the main lesson I got was fairness honors every person. And finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was fairness chooses the common good. The journey through today's readings reminds us that fairness isn't something we achieve once. It's something we practice every single day. Fairness begins with the humility to understand before we judge. It grows as we recognize the equal dignity and the potential of every person. And then fairness matures when we consistently choose what benefits the whole community over our own preferences or our own loyalties. That's not always easy. That requires curiosity instead of certainty. It requires empathy instead of assumptions. And it requires the courage to examine our own biases as carefully as we examine everyone else's. Even-handedness isn't about standing in the middle or avoiding difficult decisions. Even-handedness is about pursuing justice with wisdom, integrity, and a strong commitment to the common good. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall and see if we can figure out what these lessons really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I will try to answer two questions. So what? And now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we live in a time when disagreement too often turns into some sort of tribal warfare. Instead of asking, is this true? We ask, whose side are you on? That's true in politics, religion, and even our personal relationships. Ironically, many people who claim to follow Solomon's example of wisdom that's set out in the Bible, they spend more time trying to defeat their enemies than understand them. But fairness can't exist without the humility to listen first. When winning becomes more important than understanding, justice is replaced by loyalty, and the social trust that holds communities together begins to fall apart. And we also live in a world where some lives are treated as if they matter more than others. Whether because of wealth, race, nationality, sexual orientation, or social status, people are routinely told they belong less than everyone else, or that they don't belong at all. It's especially shocking when religious communities that preach human value become the very ones excluding others from full participation. If we truly believe every person has inherent worth, then fairness can't stop at kind words or thoughts and prayers. Fairness absolutely has to shape the way we build our schools, our workplaces, our laws, and our communities. Even-handedness calls us to judge actions by their overall impact, not just by who benefits from them. Too often, powerful institutions protect insiders, making sure that they continue to benefit while ignoring the suffering of everyone else. Too often, we become distracted by private moral debates while overlooking poverty, discrimination, corruption, or environmental harm. A fair society It requires the courage to ask difficult questions, to challenge our own biases, and then to invest our energy where it produces the greatest good. That's how we move beyond fairness as an ideal and begin living even-handedness as a practice. All right, the last question I'll try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Well, as we wrap up this reflection, let's remember that even-handedness isn't tested when we agree with someone. It's tested when emotions are high, when opinions clash, and we're convinced that we're right. Those are the moments that reveal whether we're pursuing truth or simply trying to win. So with that in mind, here's your question for the week. Where did I choose being right over understanding? I think that's a simple question, but it can uncover some uncomfortable truths. Most of us can think of a recent conversation where we kind of stopped listening because we were already preparing our next response. Quite often, the best thing we can do in moments like that is shut up and listen. I learned this lesson early in my career while negotiating contracts for Delphi Automotive Systems. And at first, I approached every negotiation with a clear picture of what we wanted, and I spent most of my energy trying to convince suppliers to accept our position. Those negotiations, they were freaking exhausting, and they weren't always successful. But eventually, I changed my strategy quite a bit, actually. Instead of talking more, I started listening more. I stopped asking, how do I win this negotiation? And I started asking, what does this supplier actually need? It turned out the answer usually wasn't simply more money. So once I understood their real concerns, well, we were often able to structure agreements that really did benefit both sides. Over several months, I helped negotiate more than 100 supplier relationships and completed dozens of major agreements. Looking back, those successes didn't come because I argued better. They came because I understood better. Look, the more often we catch ourselves in those moments, the better we become at slowing down, asking more thoughtful questions, and then separating our ego from the facts. That doesn't mean you'll always change your mind, but it does mean your conclusions will likely be wiser, your relationships will be stronger, and your commitment to fairness will become something people experience, not just something you say you believe. Well, before we finish up, I'd like to leave you with a thought from the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who wrote, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." That's a simple observation, and it's one you've hopefully heard before. I chose it today because it cuts straight to the heart of this week's question. When we're focused on being right, we're usually busy preparing our next argument instead of hearing what the other person is actually saying. Listening becomes nothing more than a pause when we collect our thoughts between our speeches. We need to change that, because when the other person is talking, truly listening gives us the opportunity to learn. This week, let that quote become a practical reminder. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Slow down. Ask one more question before offering your opinion, and then truly listen to the answer. Listen long enough to understand the other person's perspective, even if you ultimately disagree. You'll gather better information, you'll build stronger relationships, and you'll make wiser decisions. That's how even-handedness grows. Not by speaking more or speaking louder, but by listening well enough to let fairness shape what we say next. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week. But in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our question for the week. Where did I choose being right over understanding? Listening to understand rather than listening to respond will help you be much more fair and even-handed every single day. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the 17th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle A of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. Remember that even-handedness is about pursuing justice with wisdom, integrity, and a strong commitment to the common good. The Bible readings used for this episode are from the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition. Copyright 2021, National Council of Churches of Christ in the United States of America. Used by permission, all rights reserved worldwide. Thank you again for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live-streamed series held most Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Mythologizing the Bible is part of the overall values-based approach to life that I focus on at thecodaproject.com. I also publish the Weekly Compass, other blog posts about living a life that's aligned with your core values, and I share ways that you can become politically active from the comfort of your own home. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with the Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.